All right, we're back. It is the JFK Assassination Audit, video number 66. It is 24 February, and we're going to go back into the Frazier testimony. We're going to call this Frazier Follies number 2. We were looking at his transcripts from the Clay Shaw trial, February of 1969, and we'll get back into this here. It says, your observations, was he with them very much? Objection. Rephrase the question. Did you see Lee Harvey Oswald and his fellow employees at the book depository very often? With the type of work we did, sometimes you work and sometimes you work by yourself filling an order. It would depend on how bit it was. Sometimes you would have several thousand on it, or they wanted it shipped by the next day, and maybe one man couldn't get it ready for the freight line pickup. Now, if you think about what Oswald's doing, and what essentially everyone is doing there, is they're taking a list and they're going around and collecting books and putting it into a box and then shipping it off. And that really doesn't require a lot of teamwork. You're usually not going to talk to a lot of people unless you can't find something. So it makes sense that Oswald wouldn't be chit-chatting. And you know, I find it interesting that every place I've always worked, you know, I've either gotten in trouble, or other employees I've noticed gotten in trouble for chit-chatting, talking too much, not sticking to the job. And the role model was always, you know, people that stuck to the job, didn't goof off, and didn't talk a lot. That was the role model here. So it seems like Oswald is being a good worker, but later on, after the assassination, he's getting dinged for that, for concentrating on his work and not goofing off and chit-chatting and, you know, having to have the boss on his ass all the time to keep him working. Okay, so it seems to me that now, looking backward, people are penalizing Oswald for being studious and a hard worker. And, you know, again, you have to think to yourself, why would a crazy Marxist-Leninist political guy be such a hard worker for the capitalist system? Doesn't make any sense. But it seems like they're penalizing, in retrospect, Oswald for being a hard worker and, you know, sticking to his job and not goofing off and BSing and cutting up and stuff like that. So, like some people do. They go there and it's like a daycare. They think they're going to get paid just to goof off with their friends. But, you know, that's the way people are, I guess. Everybody doesn't think much about someone or something's actions that they're doing until later on, you know, they get caught doing something wrong, especially being accused of killing the president, and then all the bad things or all the little slight things that they did now all have some kind of, you know, nefarious meaning, where it could just be Oswald was, you know, dedicated to taking care of his family and his work. That could all that it, you know, that could be all that it is. Did you see him often with his fellow employees, say at lunchtime? No, sir, I did not. I know when he first went to work there, he would sit around while the fellows ate their lunch. Some played cards or dominoes, but it seemed he was more or less a loner. He would stay by himself. What color hair did Lee Harvey Oswald have, as you recall? He had light-colored hair. It looked like he had blonde, kind of blonde brownie. Maybe it had a red tint to it. Do you recall how he combed it, Mr. Frazier? Well, he was not the type you might say that was a pretty boy. He would comb his hair, and if it got messed up while he was working, he didn't stop to take time to comb it. Have you ever seen it messed up at work on occasion? Sometimes if you hit your head or something, your hair sticks up more than what it usually does, he wouldn't make an effort to comb it. Did you have occasion to observe clothing worn by Lee Harvey Oswald while he was working at the school book depository? Yes, sir. He wore most of the same type of clothes anybody else wore. He wore the older type of clothes most men wore at the warehouse. Hold on one second. Because you have cartons and crates and all that, and there's no reason to wear really nice clothes working in a warehouse. Yeah, I always found it strange. I worked at call centers, and we had a couple of these guys, I don't know why, they would dress up in suits to go take calls over the phone in a call center. And me, I would just wear my t-shirt or a polo shirt and some shorts and my boots, my hiking boots. And it just didn't make much sense to me, like they were trying to kiss ass up to the bosses or something. It wasn't appropriate for work, I guess you could say. You mean for other days other than when he went to Irving with me? Right. No. You never saw him in Irving, Texas? I saw him in Irving. Sometimes the kids, that's kind of a stupid question, isn't it, if he's going there every weekend? Sometimes the kids in the neighborhood, one kid would go to another kid's house to play, and I think I saw him several times out playing with the kids because he would go out playing baseball or something with them. But as far as seeing him every weekend, he went home. No, I did not. Are there any topics, Mr. Frazier, you did have occasion to discuss with Lee Harvey Oswald? As I'd said previously, he was not a talkative type, but you could always pretty well get him to comment out of him on either the weather or his babies. He had one child and his wife was expecting another. It seemed like he was always good with kids. As I said in my statement before, all the kids in the neighborhood seemed to like him. Mr. Frazier, did you ever see Oswald drive an automobile? No, it did not. Did you know his wife, Marina Oswald? Personally, no. I was told we object to what he was told. Do you know her or do you not know her? No, I do not, sir, I do not. Mr. Frazier, you testified that Lee Harvey Oswald did not return with you the weekend before the assassination. Is that correct? Would you repeat that again, please? Did you testify that Lee Harvey Oswald did not return with you in your automobile from Irving, Texas on the weekend before the assassination? You mean he did not go home like he usually did and come back on Monday? Right. No, sir, he did not. Was that the only weekend he did not go home with you? That's correct. Did he ever go home with you during the middle of the week or on any occasions? No, sir, except this one time prior to the assassination, which was a Thursday afternoon, which I believe was the 21st. The 21st of the month, November. Would that be the day before the assassination? Yes, sir. Did he give you any reason not going home on that day? Yes, sir, he did. What was it? He came up to me and asked me if he could get a ride home with me, and I told him sure. I naturally noticed it was not Friday and asked him why, and he replied he was going home to see his wife to get some curtain rods which he had brought with him, and that he was going to put some curtains up in his apartment. He said his wife had bought some curtain rods for him. Yes. Did you take his home that night? The night of the 21st? That doesn't make any sense. Yes, I did. Do you recall any conversation that you had that night? No more than the usual time period. Like I say, he talked about the weather and about his children, and that was about it. Did you know the President of the United States was going to pass in front of the book depository the following day? I could say a couple of days before the parade he was scheduled to come through Dallas. Several of the newspapers had various routes showing he would be coming down the downtown area. You have to come right by the school book depository to go out to the freeway there. Is that the Simmons Freeway? Yes. Did Lee Harvey Oswald mention any time on the ride of the 21st anything about the impending visit of the President of the United States? No, sir, he did not. At any time when you were working with him, did he mention the President of the United States? No, sir. Did Did you ever engage him in political conversation that you can recall? No, sir. Did you have an occasion the following morning, that is November 22nd, to return to Irving, Texas with Lee Harvey Oswald? Would you repeat that? On the following morning, that would be November 22nd, 1963, did you take Lee Harvey Oswald to the school book depository? Yes, I did. In your automobile? Yes. Can you recall approximately what time it was you left home? Approximately around, I would say, 7:20 to 7:25. I met him outside the kitchen door. On this occasion, Mr. Frazier, did Mr. Oswald or Lee Oswald have anything with him? No, he did not. When you got into the automobile, did you see anything in the automobile? He was outside the back door, and he went to the car together. We got in the other side, and I got in the regular side the driver gets in. As I sat down, I glanced over my shoulder and saw the package lying on the back seat. I asked him, I said, "What is that?" He said, "That's curtain rods I told you about." I said, "Oh, yes." I didn't look at the package anymore, and I didn't think any more about it. Prior to this trips from Irving, Texas to Dallas on Monday mornings, had Lee Oswald taken a similar package with him to the school book depository? No, he had not. On your trips from the school book depository to Irving on Fridays, he rode with you. Did he ever take a package of similar size with him? No, he did not. Where was this package in the automobile? Lying on the back seat on the side he sat on. How much of the seat did the package occupy? I would say roughly 2 feet, give or take a few inches. When you say give or take a few inches, could you approximate how many inches to give or take? Like I said, the package was roughly 2 feet. Mr. Frazier, you have been in the armed services of the United States? Yes, I have. What branch of the service? Army. Were you in the infantry? Yes, sir. I had infantry training. Did you have any rifle training? Yes, sir, I did. During the course of that training, did you ever have occasion to break a rifle down? Yes, sir, quite frequently. What kind of rifle did you use in the service? An M14? Approximately how long was the M14 that you used? I believe the correct length is 30 some odd inches long. 30 something inches long? Yes. Did you ever break the rifle down? Yes, sir, I broke it down many times. Broken down, how long was the rifle? Mr. Demon, I don't think it's relevant how long a United States Army rifle is. Mr. Alcock tells the court he intends to connect up. If Mr. Alcock tells the court he intends to connect it up, I will permit it. Yes, sir, Your Honor, I intend to connect it up. You may proceed. How long was the broken down rifle? When you break a rifle down, such as an army weapon, you can break it down into many pieces. The first part is where you take the barrel off the stock, and that reduces the size tremendously. How much does it reduce your rifle? To be honest with you, I didn't measure it because I didn't have any reason to. When you say it was reduced tremendously, would it be half or what? Objection. The witness said he doesn't know. I will permit the question. Do you have any idea what would be the longest size of the package if a army rifle is broken down? You mean the one I broke down? Yes, the one you broke down. I would say would be roughly 20 odd inches because the barrel was the longest part. Mr. Frazier, did you ever see a rifle in possession of Lee Harvey Oswald? No, sir, I did not. On this trip from Irving to Texas School Book Depository on the 22nd, did you engage Oswald in conversation that you can recall? I remember we talked about it because when we first started off, it was kind of cloudy, type misty day. It looked as though it was going to be a really nasty day. I remember I was driving along, and you know how the road grime gets on your windshield, and if you don't get enough rain, it makes it smear, and I made a few comments about that, and that would either be the rain or something. Again, I just want to focus again on this. Think about how lucky Oswald is. I mean, think about it. Okay? That he gets back to Dallas after going to Mexico City, and his wife's with Mrs. Payne, who's chatting with the little social group from the neighborhood with Wesley Frazier's sister, And she just happens to mention that Wesley Frazier just got a job at this Texas School Book Depository, and they may be hiring there, but she wasn't sure. And then so Mrs. Payne contacts Oswald, or actually I believe even contacts the depository, and gets an appointment for Oswald for the job. Oswald goes and gets the job on the same day that he moves into the Beckley address. And he moves into the Beckley address before he gets the job. And then on that same job, that just happens to be where the President of the United States is driving by the window where Oswald's working. And then that same day that it had been raining really hard, it just happened to clear up right before the assassination occurred. Think about how lucky this Marxist, Leninist, crazy Oswald really is. Just think about that. Pretty remarkable. All right. Do you recall any comment he might have made to the comment of yours? No, he did not. Do you recall approximately what time you arrived at the Texas School Book Depository that morning? He arrived in the parking lot there, I believe, roughly 8 a.m. or 10 minutes before 8 a.m. And think about that point also. So if they get there right before 8, right before everybody's starting, everybody's entering the building, everybody's going to the 6th floor because they're tearing that floor up, and Oswald's bringing in this package with the rifle in it, and no one sees Oswald with the package. Think about how lucky he is with that. That someone is going to see Oswald. He's risking. Someone's going to see him bringing in that package, but no one does. He's pretty lucky in that sense, don't you think? And then Oswald's got to get it to the 6th floor without anyone seeing, even though everyone's coming into work. Anyway, what, if anything, do you do when you arrived at the Texas School Book Depository? I parked the car, and I was sitting there. I looked at my watch, and I had a few minutes, about 8 or 10 minutes, so I sat there, and I was looking out over the Simmons Freeway, which I could see from the parking lot, and I say I would charge my battery for a few minutes because I'd been driving in tow, and you could look at your gauge and see the battery was not charging. I said to him, I will race the engine pretty fast and charge it up a little bit. What did Lee Harvey Oswald do when you were charging your battery? He got out of the car, got the package, walked behind the picket fence there, and stayed there like he was waiting on me. Did you catch up with him? As soon as I cut off the engine, I got out and closed the door, and he started walking off. I followed him, but I didn't catch up with him because at that time of the morning, tell me, how was Lee Harvey Oswald carrying the package? You described it as he was walking in front of you, parallel to his side, up and down, like you stick it up under your armpit, and the other part cupped in his hand. Did you determine whether it was the armpit or whether it was close enough to see that? No, sir. I was not close enough to see that. I didn't pay attention to any particularity, but as he was walking along in front of me, naturally, I looked in his direction, and that is what it appeared to be from what I saw. Did you see Lee Harvey Oswald enter the Texas School Book Depository? Yes, sir, I did. I saw him enter the first door there. Mr. Frazier, I'm going to ask you to leave the witness stand, come down, and view what has been marked for the purpose of identification as S34. Do you recognize the scene it depicted here? Would you repeat the question again? Do you recognize this area here? Do you recognize what it is? Yes, I do. What do you recognize it as? This is the Texas School Book Depository here where we worked at, in this building where you and Oswald worked. Yes, it is. Where did you park your car? It can be seen in this photograph on the morning of the assassination. You can't see where we parked our cars because we had another warehouse further down and we parked behind it. You can't see where you parked the car? No, sir. Can you see the entrance which Lee Harvey Oswald used when he went into the building that morning? No, sir. Can you see the entrance you used? No, sir. You may return to the stand. Thank you, Mr. Frazier. On the morning of November 22nd, did you have any occasion to see Lee Harvey Oswald at all inside the Texas School Book Depository? Yes, I did. I saw him several times that morning. He was walking around filling orders. Repeat the answer. He was walking around filling orders. That was his normal job? Yes, sir. Do you have occasion to see in the building the package that Oswald carried in the building? No, sir. I never saw the package again. So what he's saying there is that the package is gone, it's hidden somewhere, and it's not just sitting around. What did you do at lunchtime that day? We learned that morning the president was due to come about 12 o'clock, so you don't get to see the president of the United States every day. So we all went outside to watch the parade. So to see, the president is supposed to show up at 12, okay? Lee Harvey Oswald is seen at 11:55 downstairs, okay, by the phone. And then he's seen inside the lunchroom and the second floor lunchroom at like 12:15. Where did you watch the parade from? What location? I watched the parade from the top of the steps there, the main entrance into the school books. Let me impose on you one more time and ask you to leave the witness chair and come here and point out where you viewed the parade from. Would you do that, please? Right here. It is the main entrance right here. There in the shadows, you have several steps and a rail. I was standing right there at the top of the rail, referring you to the exhibit, which is marked for the purpose of identification State 36. Can you see the Texas School Book Depository in this exhibit? Yes, sir. The Texas School Book Depository would be there. Can you see in this exhibit where you parked that morning? No, sir, I cannot, because like I told you a while ago, we can't hear you. No, sir, I cannot. Can you see the spot where you were situated when the president's motorcade came by? Yes, sir, I can. Will you take this symbol and place it at the location where you were standing? Mr. Frazier, do you recall who you were with? Let's see. Who you were with during the presidential motorcade? Yes, sir, I can. When I was standing there at the top of the stairs, I was standing there by a heavy-set lady who worked up in the office. Her name is Sarah. I forgot her last name, but she was standing right there beside me when we watched the motorcade. Do you recall anyone else who may have been with you? Right down in front of me, at the bottom of the steps, was my foreman, Bill Shelley, and Billy Lovelady were standing there. Did you see the presidential motorcade that day? Yes, sir. While it was passing, did anything unusual happen? Okay, so he's basically hasn't given all the people that he saw, but again, don't you think if he saw Oswald, he would have mentioned when they said, did you see Oswald any other time that day? Oh yeah, he was standing beside me by the when the president came by, or standing behind me. And again, all these other people standing on the steps, don't you think at least one of them would say that they saw Oswald standing by them, behind them, beside them, on the steps when the president came by? Not one says that. Now, that doesn't mean Oswald was firing the rifle. It means he's back in the second floor lunchroom or the first floor lunchroom, and that's why they're not seeing him. Okay, well, as they came down Houston there and made their turn, I saw him real good, and then as they started down towards the triple underpass there right after, it was just a few seconds, some people standing on the curb there. There's a little street runs between the Texas School Books and Elm, and before people were standing there, the curb, or more or less temporarily, he was just out of sight. The question was, what if anything happened then that you recall? Sir, what if anything happened then unusual that you recall? It says, just after they made their turn there were several motorcycle policemen leading the motorcade, and right after they turned, after the car made the turn, it sounded like a motorcycle was backfiring. What was your response to the first noise? Was it a motorcycle backfire? Yes, sir. Did you hear any other noise? Shortly after that, there were two more in rapid succession. What was your response to those noises? By that time, people were running and screaming and falling down. People were shouting, "Someone is shooting." Have you ever gone hunting, Mr. Frazier? Yes, I have. Did you recognize any of these noises as rifle shots? Well, the two that come in fast succession by that time, like I said, people were hollering and I recognized them. They were rifle shots. Approximately how much time elapsed from the first noise you heard until you heard the second noise? It was just a few seconds. How much time elapsed from the time you heard the second noise until you heard the third noise? When I heard the second noise, the third noise followed nearly just right back to it. It was fired in rapid succession, almost simultaneously. So, what I'm thinking from what everyone has said is that they used the rifle being fired from the 6th floor to make a lot of noise so people would look in that direction, and then were actually also firing from the grassy knoll. That way that person wouldn't be seen there. Alright, so we're going to stop there, go back to the Des Moines Show video, and keep going.
You are such a success. Ironical, isn't it, that Marina finally did become a notorious and successful woman after Lee's death. But at the time, it was rather pathetic to hear such nonsense. Lee understood it, but we do not know if his wife did. In her strange way, maybe Marina considered her marriage to Lee and her arrival in the United States a great success. Maybe her life in USSR was even more dismal than her life here. That we shall never know. One day she related to my wife the following. What a fool was that Lee, he's throwing his passport in the face of the US ambassador. He said, "I will never go back to the United States." She obviously considered the mirage of the United States as a reality. Maybe she still hoped that Lee would at last provide her with clothes, furs, cars, luxurious home, all that she had dreamed about from her early childhood. And Lee kept on working. As far as I know, he did not make friends with his co-workers, came to us to talk about Russia, and seldom, if ever, complained about his marital troubles. But that situation became gradually almost desperate. One day, Marina came over with a baby. She was badly bruised, and we convinced her that it was time to separate. Since we did not have room in our apartment, we discussed their situation with some members of the Russian colony, and we asked an elderly couple, Mellers, M-E-L-L-E-R-S, Mellers, he a former professor from Poland, and his wife, a charming Russian woman whom he had met during the war in Germany. Both became displaced persons and eventually came to the United States. The Mellers knew Marina well, and Lee only slightly. They liked Marina, didn't have any children, and they accepted to be hosts to her and the baby. I had discussed the separation, which was to be temporary, with Lee, and he seemed to agree. We remember that we invited Lee to our home, sat him down on the sofa. The dog snuggled near him, and my wife told him directly, "When the things come to beatings, desperate quarrels, etc., it's time to separate and see if you really love each other. In a month or so, you will see if you really care to be with Marina constantly, that you cannot live alone." I interrupted, and I will let you know where Marina will be, and will let you visit the baby anytime you want to, so don't worry. He seemed to be reasonable and faced the situation rather squarely. So we said, tomorrow we shall drive over and move Marina and the baby from the apartment.
Wait a moment, Judge. I would like to talk to you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, he didn't face any situation any squarely. Remember, he threatened that he's going to break all the children's toys.
Yeah?
He's going to tear all of her dresses. He's going to break everything in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we continue
He was
talking.
violent.
He was actually almost violent. He turned white. He was furious. And he didn't even look at us. Then we start to talk to him more and more and more. And actually I said, where do you think that will get you? You'll never see your wife. You'll never see your baby. Because things like that are not permissible in our country. If you really love your wife, you have to calm down and let her go. You can visit with the child. You can talk to your wife on the phone. You'll see a few months or 2 months go by, and then you really make up your mind whether you really love her or not. Nobody ever takes the baby away from you. You will always know where the baby is, and you can always have a contact with the baby.
Mm-hmm.
That was his fear, that somebody will take the baby away from him more than taking his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then he calmed down after all
then
that.
Then he became square.
Yes, then he became...
So there you go. You hear what she just said? So if Oswald is more afraid of losing the baby than his wife, why would he risk that and risk the baby, knowing that he killed the President of the United States by killing the President of the United States? And risk going to jail? Risk being executed? Risk being killed? If he's that concerned about his baby, wouldn't that be a good reason not to kill the President of the United States? Doesn't sound like a man who is on a suicide mission, doesn't care about anything. Usually people that are on suicide missions like that go kill someone, they know they're either not going to make it out or they're going to go to jail. They got nothing left to lose. Everything's been taken from them. Okay? That's when you get a desperate person like that. Now, it could be, maybe this organization threatened him and said, hey, if you don't participate, if you don't kill the president, don't shoot the president, we're going to kill your brand new baby, your other daughter, and your wife. Or it could have been a little less severe. If you don't participate, bring the package, go to Mexico. Bad things could happen to your daughter, your brand new baby, and your wife. I think it was more possibly in that sense.
Yes.
But again, everything they're saying doesn't sound like a man who's going to waste his life and risk his life, to kill the president if he cares about the baby so much. Doesn't make much sense.
Quite.
So this is only an amendment to what Judge
Yes,
said.
it was sort of like an explosion of his fear also fear for losing a child. He had impression that if Marina and child will be moved somewhere else, there was always supposition that maybe the child will be taken away from him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he became so forceful. He thought that he's going to sort of frighten us in not doing it by his action if he'll be ferocious about it. But when he saw that we were not afraid of anything, he said and just exactly opposite, calm him down.
Mm-hmm.
So he agreed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Judge, before we go into it any further, let's end this as tape number 3. This is the third tape in the interview with Mr. and Mrs. de Mohrenschildt on their relations with the Oswald family, which is, and I repeat it again, the exclusive right of the authors, Mr. and Mrs. de Mohrenschildt, to be used in any possible way before their prior agreement. And tomorrow we will continue this taping at an early hour. Thank you both very much.
No, they were.
Okay, George.
But
This
they were
is the tape number 4 in the interview with Mr. and Mrs. de Moorenschild, and we repeat, all the material is the exclusive possession of the de Moorenschiilds. Now, we left off in tape 3, as you remember, George, in the scene where you were talking to Oswald in your house about separating from his wife Marina, and Mrs. de Moorenschild Jan interjected her passage on Oswald first being rather angry, threatening to destroy the toys, and where did we finish this completely? Or
No.
do you have a... Okay, so...
There is something to add, I think. So this is Lee arrived late to our house. Jean, my wife, prepared some food for him. As usually, he had refused food and had some soft drinks. He was naturally quite perturbed. We spoke to him as if he were our son. My wife said, "You both are good people, but it's not necessary for you to fight constantly. This is one of the worst features you obtained in Soviet Russia, the ugliest characteristic. You are you shouldn't be a man who beats his wife, but they do it in Soviet Russia. If you come to the point that you cannot tolerate each other without scratching and beating and constant fighting, and you still think you are in love with each other, the only thing to do is to separate and give each other a test if you really love each other. And if you cannot live without each other, naturally it will mean that you are in love. Otherwise, it's better to be separated." Jean suggested again, "We have a nice temporary home for Marina and the child. We will place her very safely. She and the child will have all the care she needs. If you promise not to carry any of that fights and disturb her, the people who will give Marina and June hospitality, we will give you their address and the phone, because nobody in the world has the right to separate a child from its parents."
George, please remember you are talking into a microphone. If you mumble too much, they will not be able to... How is the sound, Mr. Wallace? It's okay? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I confirmed to Lee also that I will give him the telephone and the address. I would also like to digress on that point that we had consulted the other members of the emigre colony regarding the separation of Lee and Marina, and they were all for it. They were helping Marina, and at the time there were still relatively good relations between them. And some of the members of the emigre family group in Dallas told Jean and I that we should not give Lee the address and the telephone on Marina, and should leave her completely separated from their husband. Of course, that we could not accept. As my wife mentioned before, the first reaction of Lee was quite violent. "I'll never consent to that. I'll tear all the dresses of my wife to shreds. I'll break all the toys of my child." Where on earth will it get you if you love your child and your wife? Countered my Jean. The only way to solve this misfortunate and unpleasant situation, the only proof you can give that you care for your wife and child, is to let them go, do the best you can while you are alone, and give yourself and Marina a chance to find out whether you have feelings for each other. You may hate us for it, or you may someday be exceedingly grateful to us for enforcing this separation, I said. This is logical under the circumstances. Then Lee gradually calmed down and did agree for us to come and get his wife and his child, as well as their belongings. He trusted in that we would give him the phone and the address. He left the house very blue and very thoughtful. Next day, I remember this was a Sunday, we drove to Lee Harvey Oswald's apartment on Elsbeth Street to take Marina and the baby away from him. Lee was gloomy and mad at first. Well,
How did he receive you when you get there?
He received us looking gloomily at us. Obviously, he has been thinking over all night and could not make up his mind whether he should accept the inevitable as he did the night before, or he should go on fighting. It's understandable that it was a big problem for him. We were coming to separate them.
Jean, do you have any special remembrance of that incident?
Just that I remember very vividly when we walked in, he hardly said hello, when usually we were greeted very warmly by him. Then he sat on a sofa and folded his hands and just make believe he doesn't see what goes on. He didn't offer any effort to help to carry the crib or the toys, or especially Marina's dresses. We had to do it all by ourselves. And believe me, there was about 100 dresses in there, and
Wow.
all the children's things, including playpen and crib and a carriage, and it was quite a chore. And we filled our car. We still have that. We don't want to part with it, just as a memory of what took place with this car. And it was open and filled so high that I had to sit and just hold on to things that they won't fall out. That's how many belongings Marina and a baby had at that time.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, from this point of view, our memories differ a little bit. I seem to remember that Lee was shouting at the suddenly that I will not permit it, I will not permit it, stop, don't carry things away. But we kept on helping Marina and carrying our things. Then he repeated again, I'll burn your clothes first. He shouted furiously and grabbed a bundle of clothes. I was personally about to call the police and said so to Lee, but Jean interceded again and explained patiently to Lee that violence would not help, that we were doing this for the good of both of them, that you cannot achieve anything in this country by brutalizing one's wife. My friend, I told Lee, realizing that he was receptive, you know, we are your friends. We promise you that we...
So there you go again. He wants to be with his wife. It doesn't sound like someone who's going to blow it all off, throw it all away, and kill the President of the United States.
We shall contact you as soon as Marina wants to be with you. After all, we are wasting our valuable time trying to help you. Young kids, so be cooperative, help us also. And Lee agreed, finally, and helped us to carry some of his family belongings. We had a large open car, and gradually it became filled up, mostly with Marina clothes. My wife began to get worried we would be overloaded. There must have been almost 100 dresses that Marina had acquired from various benefactors, gifts from Russian and American people who pitied this poor Russian woman. Lee handled these bundles with a supercilious smile when he was helping us.
He began to help
He
you?
finally began to help us. The playpen, the crib, came to the top of the mountain of Marina's and June's belongings. The car was overflowing. We had to hold the rags, and we must have been a ridiculous spectacle. Fortunately, it was Sunday, the traffic was sparse. Avoiding main arteries, I drove slowly to the opposite part of town, to East Dallas, and left Marina and June with a charming elderly couple, the Mellers. Little did they suspect that this kind action would cause them, after November 2363, endless troubles and investigations, and that their quiet, gentle lives would be disturbed by insane publicity and suspicion. I think this is all about this chapter.
You want to skip all that? What's here?
Nothing else. That's all.
Are you sure?
Sure, sure.
Jean, you have anything to add on the departure that Oswald became friendly and did help in the end? Would you like?
From my recollection, I don't think he did help us at all. I think he just sat there and he didn't even say goodbye to us.
That's how you remember.
That's how I remember. He was very, very cold and gloomy, from what I recall.
And did not change throughout the incident.
No, he remained very, very gloomy.
Okay, thank
All
you.
The next chapter is chapter G, which we call separation and further development.
George, you want to finish this chapter before I go into my questions to you?
Maybe within this chapter.
They don't say what this time period was, but I'm thinking it's probably around at least no later than January 1963, because in February, that's when she would have had to have gotten pregnant to have the baby in October. So couldn't be any later than January.
After that, okay, yeah. Right.
Obviously, the semi-forced separation, which we've described in the previous chapter, was not the right solution for Lee and Marina. Marina became immediately a burden on our friends, the Mellers, the Polish-Russian couple, and Lee was definitely unhappy, alone. Now he was every night in our house, asking about Marina, fretting, discussing his past, saying a little more about his disagreements with his wife. There was nothing new in them for us, just another proof that this separation was necessary. I was asked over and over again in the last 5 years, why did you waste your time with this crazy Marxist,
Exactly.
his baby and his slovenly wife? And I would like to add to this a lot of explanations, just memories of what I found interesting and
Yeah,
attractive
but George,
about Lee.
let's keep this on the
Mhm.
track now.
Yeah.
I know you have many recollections on Lee Harvey Oswald, but why don't we go through? I have collected during this first half of our interview a number of questions that I would like to ask you and clarifications on certain points. Why don't we do it up? You want it at this point?
At
It's
this
okay
point,
with me?
fine.
Okay.
So, unfortunately, we don't get the answer to that because William Altman's actually stops him from answering that question. Why did he waste so much time with Oswald? And goes on to something different. But again, you do have to ask yourself, again, it's like, it's like some rich billionaire hanging out with the janitor and helping him with his marriage. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Unless you think about it, that he's being paid to monitor Oswald, to watch Oswald, okay, and report back what they're finding. That's what I think. I think he was just an informant for either the FBI or someone in the organization, and he was just reporting back, and that's what he was doing.
And let me go over a number of things that I have found we should elaborate on a little bit. And my first question to you would be, you have indicated that Oswald had a definite liking for President John F. Kennedy.
Yes.
And how did that become clear to you?
Well, first of all, I remember talking to him and looking at the cover of Life magazine, which has the picture of President Kennedy, and he commended how handsome he was, how young, how attractive.
See, there you go.
Again, I think this appealed to him, and every time he spoke about President Kennedy, he spoke kindly of his effort to improve the racial relations in the United States.
You feel his racial
Again, doesn't sound like the comments of someone who hated someone so much that they would actually shoot them later. You don't make good, kind comments about people you're going to assassinate. All right, so we're going to stop right there and move on to the next section. Again, we're going to get back into the detainment illegal internment of Japanese Americans, how their rights were taken away, their property was taken away, their civil liberties were taken away. No law was passed. There was no due process of law. There was no trial by jury, conviction, nothing like that. It was just an executive order signed by the president, and it took away the rights of certain segment of American society there. And it says now, therefore, this is the executive order. It says now, therefore, by virtue of the authority vested in me as President of the United States, which actually had no authority to do this, and Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I hereby authorize the Director and direct the Secretary of War and the military commanders whom he may from time to time designate, whenever he or any designated commander deems such action necessary or desirable, to prescribe military areas in such places as such extent as he or she appropriate military commander may determine, from which any and all persons may be excluded, and with the respect to which the right of any person to enter or remain or leave shall be subject to whatever restrictions the Secretary of War or the appropriate military commander may impose in his discretion. So, what they're trying to do is say, like they did in Hawaii, because Hawaii was under military rule, the democratically elected government ceased to exist in Hawaii for the entire the entirety of the war. People were limited on their movement, couldn't go out at night. They were limited to how much money they could have on their persons. They were limited to how much food they could have. Their property could be searched at any moment without any due process of law or a warrant before a judge. That was all suspended. People could be detained. The right of habeas corpus, part of the Constitution, was completely suspended. People could be detained for no reason or any reason. And so what they did is they extended this to the West Coast, okay, and allowed the military commanders to decide which people or which groups of people or Americans were most likely at risk for betraying the country somehow, and were able to relocate those people, basically deprive them of the rights, deprive them of due process, steal their property, take their property, and not recompensate them, and detain them throughout the duration of the war. It says the designation of military areas in any region or locality shall supersede designations prohibited in restricted areas by Attorney General under provision proclamations of December 8, 1941, and shall supersede the responsibility and authority of the Attorney General under the said proclamations in respect to such prohibited and restricted areas. Again, fear. Fear is the greatest motivator for taking away our rights and allowing the government to take away our rights. You see what happened after 9/11? We had the Patriot Act. The government was able to, just under any kind of any kind of suspicion, go into someone's home without a warrant. They're called sneak and peek. They would go in, look around, search the house, and then if they found something, then they could go back and get a retroactive warrant to do a more extensive search. They were able to put taps on phones, taps on computers without a warrant. All they had to do is say, hey, this person was accused or suspected of terrorism. And that's all the activity they needed. And all that was given and approved by Congress because of 9/11 out of fear. Same thing as applying here with this executive order. I hereby further authorize and direct the Secretary of War and the said military commanders to take such and other steps as appropriate military commander may deem advisable to enforce compliance with restrictions applicable to each military area here and above authorized to be designated, including the use of federal troops and other federal agencies with authority to accept assistance of state and local agencies. Now here's another dirty little secret that a lot of people don't know about and we don't like to highlight in America, is that basically the president can do and carry out anything he wants to do. unless he's stopped by a law passed by Congress or stopped by the courts. Until that time, the president can basically get away with murder, okay, until he's either impeached by Congress or laws passed by Congress making that illegal, or court is challenging the courts, the Supreme Courts. The president has free reign to do whatever he wants. Now, reason no one has ever challenged that is because, you know, we always, up until Trump, have expected to have reasonable, mature, sane men in office. We hope that our process weeds out the fanatics and the crazies and the criminals and the Hitlers and stuff like that. But we came very close with Trump, you know, trying to order the military to suspend, you know, to seize the voting machines, to go over and seize Congress. And of course, thank God, the military takes an oath to the Constitution and not the president. Whereas in other countries, they take an oath to the president and follow his orders. And then they can just sit back and say, oh, I was just following orders. Anyway, we have a liberal president here, one that, you know, once the war started, was enforcing equal rights in the military, in jobs, equal pay for minorities, and in defense contracts and stuff like that. But here is actually taking away the rights of a minority just because they just happen to be of the same, ethnic descent as our enemy, even though they were born in the United States. It says, I hereby further authorize and direct all executive departments to assist the Secretary of War or the said military commanders in carrying out this executive order, including the furnishing of medical aid, hospitalization, food, clothing, transportation, use of land, shelter, and other supplies, equipment, and utilities, facilities, and services. This order shall not be construed as modifying or limiting any way the authority hereto granted under Executive Order Number 8972, dated December 12, 1941, nor shall it be construed as limiting or modifying the duty of responsibility of the Federal Bureau of Investigation with respect to the investigation about alleged acts of sabotage, or the duty and responsibility of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice under proclamations 7 and 8 December 1941 prescribing regulations the conduct and control of alien enemies, except as a duty and responsibility is superseded by the designation of military areas hereunder. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the White House, February 1942. Hold on one second. It says here on March 21st, 1942, Roosevelt signed Public Law 77-503, approved after only an hour of discussion in the Senate and 30 minutes in the House, in order to provide the enforcement of his executive order. Oh, so now he got a law to pass it, authored by War Department official Carl Bindeston, who would later be promoted to Director of Wartime Civilian Control Administration and oversee the incarceration of Japanese Americans. The law made violations of military orders a misdemeanor punishable by up to $5,000 in fine and 1 year in prison. Using a broad interpretation of Executive Order 9066, Lieutenant General DeWitt, John DeWitt, hold on one second. And here's DeWitt. In February 1942, DeWitt reported to President Franklin D. Roosevelt that no sabotage by Japanese Americans had yet been confirmed, but he commented that it only proved of disturbing and confirming indication that such action will be taken. So they had no evidence of any kind of sabotage by Japanese Americans, but they were under suspicion that eventually those actions would be taken. Good Lord. He recommended the evacuation of all Japanese from the coastal areas of California, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska, then incorporated U.S. territory at the time. Using Executive Order 9066, DeWitt then began implementing a plan for classifying, rounding up, and removal of undesirables. On March 2, 1942, DeWitt issued Military Proclamation No. 1, which designated the western parts of Oregon, California, and Washington as Military Area No. 1, further dividing into Prohibited Zone A1 and Restricted Zone B. In the first phase of the order, a provision which included directing that any person of Japanese ancestry now resident in Military Area No. 1 who changes his place of habitual residence must file a change of residence notice at his local post office not more than 5 days nor less than 1 day prior to moving. Days later, DeWitt announced that the Army had acquired 5,000 acres of land near Manzanar, California, for construction of a reception center, basically an internment camp, which he said would be used principally as clearinghouse for more than permanent resettlement elsewhere for persons excluded from military areas. On March 6, Executive Order 9066 was later extended to all Japanese persons and Americans of Japanese ancestry living in Alaska. Removal began on March 23rd with the resettlement of citizens living in Los Angeles. On that date, General DeWitt issued new orders applying to Japanese Americans setting an 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew and banning ownership of firearms, radios, cameras, and other contraband. DeWitt stated, Let me warn the affected aliens and Japanese Americans that anything but strict compliance with this proclamation provision will bring immediate punishment. Wow. Of course, no one was accused, no one was tried, no one was convicted, no one was found guilty of any of these things they're accused of, but fear allowed them, because everyone else is like, oh, it's Japanese, they're a fourth rail living amongst us, they could be the enemy, helping the enemy here. So because of our fear, we allowed their rights to be taken away. Northern California followed in April. As DeWitt declared, we plan to increase the tempo of evacuation as fast as possible. Citizens in specific areas were required to report to the designated civilian control station, where they would be taken to an assembly center for relocation. A lot of people don't know it, but I lived in Portland, but a lot of people don't know that in Portland, the Expo Center now, where they have all the expositions in North Portland, was actually an internment camp, the internment center for Japanese that are being shipped out of Oregon. Also, DeWitt ordered the removal of internment of 110,000 ethnic Japanese persons from their homes in West Coast to internment camps inland. According to DeWitt, a Jap is a Jap, whether a U.S. citizen or not. Wow. So even though these people were raised in America, they had businesses in America, their kids went to American schools, they spoke English, they went to American colleges, they held jobs, they paid taxes, they served in the military, some even served as policemen, they were still considered the enemy. A federal judge, James Auger Fee of Portland, ruled in November 1943 that American citizens could not be detained without proclamation of martial law. DeWitt's response was, all military orders and proclamations of this headquarters remain in full force in effect. So here we have the military completely ignoring a judge's order. And what I'm using this for in relation to the Kennedy assassination is fear. They were trying to bully LBJ. At first they tried bullying Kennedy into invading Cuba out of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the communists, fear of the nuclear weapons. They tried to do the same thing with LBJ. And then Warren was put through fear by LBJ that, hey, if we don't just narrow it down just to Oswald, these crazies in the military and the intelligence community are going to want us to invade Cuba, and that's going to start World War III and kill billions of people in the world. And of course, Mr. Warren, the blood of billions of people and millions of Americans is all in your hand. See, fear will make most people see where are the Americans protesting against the detainment of fellow Americans and their rights being taken away, their constitutional rights being taken away, their property being taken away, and they're being detained in detention camps, internment camps, with no due process of law. It was fear that caused white Americans to step back and allow other Americans' rights to be taken away. You remember that thing that happened in Germany, and then that little poem that someone wrote that, first they came for the unionists and the labor leaders, and I said nothing because I wasn't a unionist or a labor leader. And then they came for the Jews, and I said nothing because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for the political opposition, the socialists and the Democrats, and I said nothing because I wasn't a socialist or a Democrat. And then they came for the church leaders, and I said nothing because I wasn't a church leader. And then one day, they came for me, and there was no one left to defend me, and they took me, and I was killed. This is the same thing. The military was using fear to detain American citizens, and others were afraid to speak out. After the relocation of Japanese Americans was complete, DeWitt lifted curfew restrictions on Italian Americans on October 19 and on German Americans on December 24th. Technically, the curfew was inapplicable to Japanese since all members of this group were removed from affected areas. So, Japanese Americans, they're Asians, therefore they must be the enemy. They're siding with the Japanese. But, German and Italian Americans, they're white, they look like us, so they're okay. We can trust them, right? Anyway, DeWitt had a personal vendetta against one Italian, in particular, Remo Bassia, which he detailed in Bosnia's autobiography, The General and I. DeWitt was opposed to the War Relocation Authority efforts to distinguish loyal from disloyal Japanese Americans and to the creation of all Japanese combat unit. He testified before Congress in 1943 that he would use every proper means at his disposal to stop the resettlement of Japanese American outside camp and their eventual return to the West Coast after the war. His and Colonel Carl Bendistent's final report, circulated and then hastily redacted in 1943 and 1944, also laid out his position that their race made it impossible to determine their loyalty. Wow. Thus necessitating internment. Your race makes it impossible to determine your loyalty. Holy crap. So let's not forget that the largest ethnic group in all of Hawaii was Japanese at the time. So a lot of these people of Japanese descent were members of the National Guard in Hawaii. All these National Guardsmen were called up, confined to barracks with no weapons, almost in jail, and then they were shipped out of Hawaii and shipped up to Minnesota, where they were placed in virtually an internment camp, but under strict military supervision. Eventually, they were allowed to fight. I believe it was once we invaded Italy, they were sent to Italy as a unit and were allowed to fight to prove their loyalty as long as they were killing Italians and Germans. In 1980, Eiko Herzig Yasunaga interned at Manzanar concentration camp as a teenager, found a copy of the original final report of the archives along with notes showing the numerous differences between the original and the redacted versions. The earlier racist and inflammatory version, as well as the FBI and Office of Naval Intelligence reports, led to the coram nobis trials. A writ of coram nobis is a legal order allowing a court to correct its original judgment upon discovery of fundamental error that did not appear in the records of original judgment proceedings that would have prevented the judge from being pronounced. So they didn't even get trials, which overturned the convictions of Fred Korematsu and Gordon Habarashi and Minoru Yashu on all charges related to their refusal to submit to exclusion and internment. And there's another thing. If you refuse to abide by the unconstitutional War Relocation Authority Act, you were given a trial, a military trial, and almost all of them were convicted and sent to prison. The courts found that the government had intentionally withheld the reports and other critical evidence as trials all the way up to the Supreme Court, which would have proved that there is no military necessity for the exclusion and internment of Japanese Americans. In the words of the Department of Justice officials writing during the war, the justifications were based on willful historical inaccuracies and intentional falsehoods. DeWitt's orders also regulated other areas of life on the West Coast. The proclamation prohibited deer hunting and the playing of outdoor sports at night. An Alaska Travel Office was established to issue permits to anyone seeking travel into or out of the territory of Alaska. Less known is DeWitt's role in supervising the combat operations of the Aleutian Islands, some of which had been invaded by the Japanese forces. When houses of prostitution were closed across America, DeWitt allowed Sally Stafford to continue to operate a high-class brothel in San Francisco. At the end of his tenure as head of the Western Defense Command, he was appointed as Commandant of the Army and Navy Staff College in Washington. He retired from the Army in June 1947. Wow. So just think of it this way. If they can take your rights away, or if they can take someone else's rights away, they can definitely take your rights away eventually. Alright, so we're going to stop there, and we're going to get back to the Constitution here. Hold on one second. I think I've spent enough time on that. Kind of made my point. Alright, so I want to end with this quote by a Japanese American who was interned during World War II. It says, sometimes America failed and suffered. Sometimes she made mistakes, great mistakes. Her history is full of errors, but with each mistake she has learned. Can we, the graduating class of Amenshi Senior High School, believe that America still means freedom, equality, security, justice? Do I believe this? Do my classmates believe this? Yes, with all our hearts, because in the faith, in that hope, is my future, the world's future. Excerpt from a graduation valedictory address delivered at the Amenshi internment camp in southern Colorado. So, This girl spent her last 4 years of high school in a concentration camp in her own country. She did nothing wrong except her parents, grandparents, great-grandparents had come to America to live the American dream. And because the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and she just happened to look like the Japanese, like the enemy, even though she was born in America, spoke English, went to their schools, maybe worked a job. Her own country took away her rights, took away her freedom, took away her parents' property and their business, and put them in internment camps for 4 years. And then after all of that, she graduates from high school in that internment camp. She still believes, after all that, she still believes in America. I still believe in America.